Kamala Harris and Donald Trump will debate for the first time tonight in Philadelphia. The debate is highly anticipated, as the latest polls show an extremely tight race both nationally and in key swing states. The rules are similar to the first debate between President Biden and Trump: muted mics while the other candidate is speaking and no live audience, which had been a feature of debates in years past. Joining us to discuss this and more, the Hill White House reporter Brett Samuels. Brett, I noticed something interesting in the latest poll from New York Times Siena College. More than a quarter of voters say they need to learn more about Kamala Harris. This seems like a big opportunity in this debate for Harris and Trump to define who she is.
Yeah, this debate, it's sort of a unique situation where one of the candidates has only been atop the ticket for, about 6 weeks at this point. And as that poll from the New York Times reflects, there's a good chunk of voters, about a quarter of voters, who still feel like they don't know enough about Harris, enough about her policies. So, unlike the debates between former President Trump and President Biden, where both candidates had been sort of front and center in the spotlight for several years and everyone pretty much knew how they felt about them, with Kamala Harris, this is really an opportunity for her to introduce herself to millions of viewers who will be tuning in. It's a chance for her to lay out policy-wise how she would be different from Joe Biden, how she might be similar to Joe Biden. And like you mentioned, it's also an opportunity for former President Trump to go on offense, to go on the attack and really kind of, tie Harris to Biden, tie her to her record as a prosecutor, and try and paint her as a radical liberal, as the Trump campaign likes to say, given that there's a swath of voters who don't really know how they feel about her yet.
With so much at stake, there's a lot of anxiety on both sides heading into the debate. On the Democratic side, things have gone pretty smoothly since Harris took over the top of the ticket, but she's still basically tied with Trump in the polls. Nate Silver, the election forecaster, gives Trump a 64% chance of winning the Electoral College. What are you hearing from Democrats about their hopes and fears heading into this debate?
Yeah, like you said, there's obviously a lot of enthusiasm from Democrats. They feel like things have gone extremely well since Vice President Harris took over atop the ticket. She's smashed fundraising records. She's drawn these huge, enthusiastic crowds, and she's erased former President Trump's polling lead that he had over President Biden nationally and in swing states. So on the one hand, they're really optimistic. They feel good about things, especially compared to just a couple of months ago when it felt like this race was, a long shot for Democrats to win. But on the flip side, they're trying to kind of temper expectations. Vice President Harris and her team have been really adamant that they view themselves as underdogs in this race. That New York Times poll that came out just a few days before the debate showed Harris trailing by 1 point nationally against former President Trump. She was ahead in a few battleground states, but they were running pretty much even. So it is sort of this push and pull between optimism from Democrats who feel like things are going really well, who feel like they have momentum, but also, like you mentioned, Drew, the fact that this race is basically tied. It's not like Harris has taken that momentum and pulled way ahead. So Democrats are certainly trying to kind of keep their eye on the ball here and make clear that they view themselves as underdogs and they're going to have a lot of work to do for the home stretch of this campaign.
On the Republican side, the major question I have is this: can Trump stay on message and avoid personal attacks? Now, that's nothing new with Trump, but what are you hearing from Republicans heading into the debate? Is it let Trump be Trump or try to keep the reins on him a little bit?
Yeah, certainly, that's the concern for pretty much every Republican who's watching this debate, I think, is can Donald Trump avoid the kind of self-created controversies, the self-created problems that he's had in past debates where he repeatedly would interrupt his opponent or the moderator, where he would get personal, he would get off track. Trump has shown in rallies and appearances since Kamala Harris entered this race that he really struggles to do that against her as his opponent in particular. He always is attacking her intelligence. He's attacking her laugh, going after her appearance and questioning, whether she deserves to be the nominee. So, I think he'll be hard pressed to really be restrained against an opponent who he clearly has shown some contempt for. But on the other hand, the Trump campaign, I think they're less concerned about if he can fully avoid those kinds of attacks and more concerned about can he attack her over her record. So they feel like if he successfully attacks her on her record, maybe if he even gets off track a couple times, as long as viewers come away from the debate viewing Harris, as more of a liberal, as more farther left than she wants to present herself, I think the Trump campaign will view that as a win.
Let's talk a little bit more about what the polling shows in this race. That New York Times Siena College poll had Trump up by 1 point nationally, 48 to 47. And while Harris is tied or leads in every swing state, she continues to struggle with white working class voters. Is that her Achilles heel, especially when we're looking in those blue wall states in the Midwest that Democrats are seeking are so important to their chances in November?
Yeah, absolutely. Those white working class voters, that's kind of the bread and butter for the Trump campaign. That's been sort of the demographic that Trump has really done very well with in both 2016 and 2020. Those are voters that he wants to, run up the score with. And so the question is, on the one side, can Vice President Harris and her campaign, can they make enough inroads with those kinds of voters with, sort of these populist economic proposals that she's leaning into about price gouging, about housing policy, things like that? Can she peel away some of Trump's support with those voters and, appeal to them as more of a moderate? And then on the other hand, if she can't, then she will need to run up the score with, voters of color, with Black voters, with women voters, especially where there's this big gender gap that Harris has the advantages with women voters in particular. She'll need to run up the score with those voters to kind of offset her losses with white working class voters. So it'll be very interesting to see, come election day, what these coalitions look like and kind of how these two campaigns are trying to stitch together enough votes to get to 270 electoral votes in the Electoral College.
Let's talk about Florida, my home state, once the crown jewel of swing states. Obama won it twice, but it's been leaning Republican in statewide races since then. But there is a new poll out that shows Trump winning by just 2 percentage points in the Sunshine State. Now, abortion rights and medical marijuana are both also on the ballot, adding to this intrigue over what exactly the electorate will look like on Election Day. Brett, is Florida really in play?
Count me as skeptical that it's really in play at the top of the ticket. I think, as you mentioned, this is a state that has really leaned Republican increasingly in the last couple cycles. It's Trump's home state. Obviously, Ron DeSantis, the governor, he enjoyed a landslide reelection win in 2022. So this is a state that has just continued to kind of trend red and trend toward Republicans in recent years. And, there's really no indication, I think, that Vice President Harris can fully overtake Donald Trump in Florida to win at the top of the ticket. On top of that, there's a Senate race where Rick Scott is, he's facing a challenger, but I think there's no real indication that he's at risk of losing that race. The question is basically, as you mentioned, Drew, abortion will be on the ballot. That certainly has been proven to turn out Democratic voters in particular, who are motivated by voting to protect abortion rights. So the question, I think, is, does that juice turn out enough for Democrats that they're able to get enough supporters out there to make this race close and interesting? But, in 2020, there was talk about whether President Biden could put Florida in play. It ended up being pretty comfortably won by Trump. And, I just think that the attention is on all these other swing states. I'm skeptical that the Harris campaign is really putting a lot of eggs in the Florida basket.
Maybe Harris can't actually make a play to win Florida, but if she's able to force the Trump campaign to play defense there, maybe that provides some advantage to her when it comes to bleeding resources from the Trump campaign more on a national level.
Yeah, certainly. And, that's been a question, I think, for the Trump campaign that they have faced, is this question of whether they are, staffed up on the ground, whether they have the ground game in these battleground states to compete with the Harris campaign, where they've sort of bragged about the number of field offices, the number of volunteers that they have in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, in Nevada, Arizona, states like that. So to your point, if the Harris campaign can force the Trump campaign even to think twice or to kind of, maybe devote a little extra money to running ads in Florida, to devoting some volunteers to Florida, that certainly could make a difference in what's expected to be a really close election.
Critics of former President Trump say they are growing more worried about retaliation if Trump wins re-election. Over the weekend, Trump threatened to prosecute donors, lawyers, and election officials who he claims cheated in the 2020 election and who he says may engage in unscrupulous behavior in November. We should note that these claims by Trump are completely unfounded, but do you think these threats could have a chilling effect on some of Trump's critics?
Yeah, I think that's the big concern, is sort of what is the effect as people get ready to go to the polls, as people get ready to cast their ballots in early voting. is whether this kind of rhetoric makes people think twice, whether it leads them to be concerned about, volunteering as poll workers, volunteering as election workers. Is that going to create a chilling effect, as you said, if Trump is threatening to prosecute people who he claims cheated, whatever that may look like to Trump once this election is over. Obviously, we saw in 2020 he went after election workers in Georgia, and that had this long tail ripple effect on their lives. Certainly, I think there is this sort of question of whether people will be concerned about the legal fallout if they are targeted by Trump, if they are targeted by Republicans in the Trump campaign. They've really ramped up this poll watcher effort to get volunteers to be at the polls in November on election day. And then on top of that, the more high profile critics like Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, these sort of outspoken critics of former President Trump, I think, if Trump wins in November, there is a sort of genuine concern of how he would use power to potentially go after his opponents, to target them with prosecution, to use the Justice Department against them. So these are all things that the Harris campaign and Trump critics are really sounding the alarm over and basically trying to say, Trump is being very open about what he plans to do if he wins, about how he might wield power. So I think this is a storyline certainly that's going to remain front and center for a lot of folks leading up to Election Day.
Tulsi Gabbard, the former Democratic presidential candidate turned Trump supporter, is serving as an attack dog for the Trump campaign. She's now taking aim at Dick and Liz Cheney, the former Republican vice president, and his daughter, a former GOP congresswoman, have endorsed Kamala Harris. Now, the Cheneys being in the good graces of Democrats just shows the strange political times we live in. But what impact do you think all this has on the race?
Yeah, it is certainly an election season of odd bedfellows. You have Robert Kennedy Jr. is endorsing former President Trump, Tulsi Gabbard, as you mentioned, in the Trump campaign, and then the Cheneys are backing the Democratic nominee. You have other Republicans, including former Trump administration officials, who are backing Vice President Harris for the White House in November. So certainly just an odd mix of people crossing political lines. But I think the question of the impact it'll have on the race is that both campaigns feel like, it could make a difference in the margins, and that's going to matter in states like Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, where the margin is going to be extraordinarily close, where, if, for example, in Pennsylvania, if Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney's endorsement and the endorsement of these other Republican Trump critics, if that nets Kamala Harris, an extra 10,000 votes, that could be a big deal in a close race. And similarly, in a state like Michigan or a state like North Carolina, if RFK Jr. is off the ballot and he's campaigning for Trump, or Tulsi Gabbard's out there campaigning for Trump, maybe that nudges a few thousand votes Trump's way, and that could be a difference in a state that was decided by 10, 15,000 votes in 2020. So it's all about kind of peeling away votes at the margins, and certainly these are high-profile names who are going to get a lot of attention.
Vice presidential candidate JD Vance and other top Republicans are promoting a false claim that Haitian migrants in Ohio are eating people's pets. The claim has swirled around online, amplified by conservatives used to attack the Biden administration's immigration policy. Officials in Springfield, Ohio, where the claims are focused, say the rumors are completely false and actually distract from a real problem they do have trying to provide social services to an influx of immigrants from Haiti. Brett, separate the true from the false here.
Yeah, this is really just kind of the latest, I think, storyline that we're seeing sparked up on social media and sort of, I think elevated by right-wing folks and Republicans who are trying to, fearmonger about migrants and create concern about what migrants might be doing in communities in an election year. Obviously, as you mentioned, there was this sort of rumor that circulated on social media. JD Vance elevated it. He's obviously on the Republican ticket, and so that got a lot of attention. But as you mentioned, authorities in Springfield, Ohio, have said that there's no evidence. They've gotten no reports of Haitian migrants abducting pets or eating pets. So essentially, this is a fabricated claim. There's nothing to this, that this is some kind of rampant problem in this part of Ohio. But Republicans are now trying to spin away from that claim and basically say that they're talking more broadly about the kind of risks that migrants pose to communities, to weighing on their services and their housing supply and things of that nature. So, it's just kind of, I think, as the White House put it, some of this is rooted in racism, but more broadly, I think this is just part of a broader effort by Republicans to highlight something about migrants, to highlight something about immigration, and try and paint it as this broader reason for the public to be concerned and to vote for Trump, who has obviously vowed to crack down on the border.
I wonder if it's an effective strategy when you actually end up making a joke of a real issue you're trying to bring to the public eye. But let's talk about this effort to avert a government shutdown by Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson. It appears that effort is doomed at the moment. Johnson is facing opposition from both the right-wing and moderate flanks of his party. Johnson's plan would pair a 6-month spending bill with a plan backed by former President Trump requiring proof of citizenship to vote. Critics of that effort point out it's already illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal elections. Brett, what's going to happen now?
Yeah, well, as you said, Drew, this effort seems to be pretty much dead on arrival, already. Speaker Johnson, he could only afford to lose 4 Republican votes, and that's assuming that all Democrats voted against this proposal because of that tight margin in the House. And already we're seeing several Republicans come out, raise their concerns with this proposal. They're worried about, essentially what the plan B is from Speaker Johnson, because even if Republicans do rally behind this proposal, there's no way it's going to pass the Senate, where Democrats are in control there. So, it seemed like this effort to ban non-citizens from voting, which, as you mentioned, is already illegal. This was sort of a political messaging exercise, but it's obviously kind of floundering and being tied to this short-term spending deal. So, I think what happens next is essentially the two sides are going to have to go back to the drawing board. It seems like there is a consensus. Nobody wants a shutdown at the end of the month. They want to keep the focus on the 2024 campaign. Obviously, members have their own campaigns to run. So, the question is just how quickly does Republican leadership, I think, come to grips with the fact that their own party is revolting against this proposal and come up with something new, so that both sides can kind of deal in reality here and see what kind of short-term funding deal they can get done to punt this past the election.
All right, that's all I got for you. Brett Samuels, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
And that's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.